Rewind, your week in review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.
This week on Rewind, your week in review.
Wisconsin is bouncing back.
Governor Evers announces $130 million in workforce development spending. Wisconsin is awash in campaign cash. And 8 months later, we're still talking about the 2020 election? This and more on Rewind, your week in review for July 16th. Welcome to this week's episode of Rewind. I'm Jessica VanEgeren.
I'm J.R. Ross.
Let's get started with this week's show. We're going to start out today with the campaign finance reports that were due yesterday at midnight. There are some record-breaking numbers in there, and these reports obviously give those of us following political races a glimpse of what's inside each candidate's campaign coffers. Let's start with Governor Evers. Evers raised $5 million over the first 2 quarters of 2021, bringing the total amount he has in the bank to $7.3 million. In what will be a rematch in Wisconsin's 3rd congressional district, incumbent Ron Kind raised less than challenger Derek Van Orden, roughly $500,000 compared to $750,000, but Kind has more cash on hand, $1.3 million compared to $609,000. Up in the Green Bay area, U.S. Rep. Mike Gallagher raised nearly $509 million, bringing his total to $2.3 million. Flipping to the race for Attorney General, we saw some action on this front this week, with incumbent Josh Kaul making his race for re-election official, with the campaign reports showing he raised $411,000, bringing the amount in the bank for Kaul to $537,000, with a bulk of his funds coming from unions. This is significantly more than his challengers. All eyes are on U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. He still isn't committing to a 3rd run for office, but he raised $1.2 million, spent nearly $500,000 in expenses, leaving him with $1.7 million cash on hand. That's a significant uptick from what Johnson raised in the first quarter of this year. As far as his competitors are concerned, Alex Lasry raised $1 million. State Treasurer Sarah Godlewski raised $500,000. Tom Nelson raised $240,000 with just over $400,000 in the bank, and Wausau Dr. Jillian Bettino raised over $100,000, but this included a $70,000 loan she gave the campaign and consequently spent, leaving her campaign coffer with roughly $34,000 in it. JR, let's start the discussion with this race for Attorney General. What did you find most interesting about the numbers and the amounts and where they were coming from as far as this race and the candidates are concerned?
Well, let's start with Ryan Owens, first-time candidate, Republican, seeking the GOP nomination. If you look at his report, he put up a good number, especially as he got in late April, like April 19th. And what he had was donations from people who have connections. Yeah. So I look at finance reports a lot. There are some donors who show up time and time again in finance reports. One of them is Don Zietlow, for example, Quick Trip CEO. Yeah. Prodigious GOP donor. Some other people I saw in there were folks like Rick Graber, former state GOP chair, now CEO of the Bradley Foundation, conservative group in Milwaukee. Also Michael Grebe, the former Bradley Foundation CEO. These are people who know people. Yeah. So not just that they gave money to Owens, but they also know people who give money on top of that. So Owens is building a nice network of donors. Now, I kind of get the impression the Owens folks thought they were going to best Josh Kaul this first reporting period, because Kaul has been an okay fundraiser, but a great one. Kaul, though, stepped up the game the first half of the year. So that $411,000 raised, about $91,000 from committees, so not too bad, more than what Owens had. But Kaul, though, is in a better position right now than Brad Schimmel was at this same point in 2017 before he lost to Kaul in 2018. Longer view, this is the best July report of an off year for any AG candidate in the last decade. Now, I'd go back farther, but they're not posted on the Ethics Commission website to check. I'm pretty sure that that's more than most AG candidates have raised in Wisconsin
that's
history.
That's a pretty significant milestone for call to claim,
absolutely.
Raising the most. What about Ron Johnson's race? I mean, we all know that he's stayed silent on this. He hasn't said whether or not he's going to run for a third term, but his numbers are, what do you make of the numbers? Is this, he's just holding out? Is he going to go in? I mean, what do you find interesting about the money that he's raised, even though he hasn't said whether or not he's going to run yet?
Hey, look, I ask every week, the public going to talk to is what's Ron Johnson going to do? And they tell me they don't know. They expect him to wait until next year to make a decision. What Ron Johnson is doing is what he needs to do to get things rolling if he's going to run. Okay. Now, put this in perspective. Ron Johnson has not been known as a prodigious fundraiser in off years. So in the first quarter of the year, when speculation was ramping up about whether he was going to run, he raised about $480,000. No, wait, take that back. $545,000, a lot of numbers today I know. But first three months of the year, $545,000 was raised. Okay, that was for him an uptick.
Okay.
Go back to 2017. From July of 17 until April of this year, he only cracked six figures twice in fundraising. So he has not been somebody who put a lot of effort into that endeavor during off years. Okay, now he's raised $1.2 million. Good number. But look at the incumbents who are kind of like the top targets nationally. And, you look at these national lists, there are 5 incumbents who are always on these lists, no matter what. It's Ron Johnson, Raphael Warnock in Georgia, who raised $7.2 million in this reporting period. Mark Kelly, Democrat from Arizona, $6 million. Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, $3.3 million. Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada, another Democrat, $2.8 million. Some of these top 10 lists will have Marco Rubio on there, Republican from Florida, $4 million. What I'm bringing this up is that Ron Johnson for Ron Johnson is doing better. But Ron Johnson for a national target is not in a great position, although his Democratic opponents also aren't like topping him. I mean, Alex Lasry, for example, he raised $1 million this period after raising $1 million the first 3 months of the year, but he burned through $737,000. Why is that important? Well, in fundraising, sometimes you spend money to make money.
Yeah.
All right? So Alex was a first-time opponent, a first-time candidate. A lot of these guys raise money through list, so a fundraising list. Sometimes what you do is you buy a list or rent a list from somebody else because you have somebody you like, you have similar interests, similar possible supporters. You rent their fundraising list. You pay money for that. Then you go out and you send mail, you send emails, you might make phone calls to build your own list. Sometimes it pays off. Scott Walker, when he was governor, was known for burning through cash to raise money, and people always go, "Oh, that's a problem. It's burn rate." Called the burn rate in politics. He's spending too much money to raise money. Where it pays off, though, is if you get those donors in the door, you can hit them up for like $50, $100, $200 at a time, especially when it gets to crunch time of a race, and it pays off. So the question is a Lasry, for example, successfully building a list? We'll see if it pays off. Sarah Godlewski, one thing about her numbers, she didn't have a great period, but she got the endorsement of Emily's List like the day before the period ended. Emily's List is known for supporting female kids who support abortion rights.
That's a good endorsement.
Yeah. But the financial piece of that is not going to hit until now, right? There wasn't time to fundraise off of that.
So we might see that in the next period as for the impact that the Emily's List is going to have on her.
Well, Godlewski, if you're Godlewski, you hope so, because you want to try and catch up where others are at. Tom Nelson, he's not quite got the same kind of pizzazz as other candidates, but he's a grinder. He keeps grinding away, and look, the guy's got the second biggest war chest being Dem right now in the field, so don't dismiss that. The others, like Senator Chris Larson, $51,000 raised. He got in late May, didn't have a lot of time. The question is, will he be able to build a network to get him formidable fundraising-wise? Stephen Olacara, who's really in but not quite in, he's exploring a run. He raised $62,000, so not bad for just thinking about it. Yeah. But again, there are tiers you're seeing develop, right? And who's missing? Mandela Barnes.
Yeah. What's going on with Mandela?
Well, we all know he's going to get in. It's a question
of when. You just have to wait and see. Yeah. No, these numbers are fascinating, and we're still 16 months out from the 2022 election. So, watching all this kind of continue to unravel will be interesting in the weeks ahead for sure. So,
and Mandela, when he gets in, the question is, what's he going to bring to the table? Can he bring a? He's got a little bit of a national following as a lieutenant governor, which is unusual for lieutenant governors. But can he turn that into a big number? Because we've seen like his website be reconfigured to look like a statewide race. We've seen flashes of like fundraising stuff going out there, so we know he's going to get in, or he's preparing for it.
Yep.
When's he getting in? He's also hired some people to come on board. When's he going to get in? And then can he have an impressive number? Timing is everything in politics, and if you're going to run for office, if you're watching at home, announce the day after the reporting period ends. It gives you a full period to raise money. So here it is, end of June 30th, mid-July. If he gets in, let's say the next week or two, he's got almost a full 3 months to raise money and show what he can do fundraising-wise. But, look, Lazarus got a head start. Galusi's got a head start. Can Mandela, assuming he gets in, can he catch up?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think we're going to pivot now to our next topic. Evers earlier this week made an announcement up in Green Bay about $130 million workforce development spending, investing in the workforce. Of that, $100 million is for a workforce innovation grant. This grant is designed to encourage various regions of the state to develop leading-edge, long-term solutions to workforce challenges that the state faces in the wake of the pandemic. $20 million of that is for worker advancement initiatives, and $100 million of that is for worker connection programs. And what that does is connect workforce career coaches with individuals to help them re-engage in the workforce post-pandemic. This announcement, I think as you pointed out in one of your articles, comes as the state has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation and continues to lead as far as getting shots in the arms of people to, combat the pandemic. As far as what officials are saying on this, and this kind of is not a surprise, WEDC Secretary Missy Hughes was in favor of this, part of the Evers administration, said that the grants provide regional flexibility. The DWD secretary said the grants will expand the candidate pools, but then you have GOP leaders coming out saying essentially that this is too little too late. So I want to kind of throw it to you here, JR. It seems that both parties have the same goal. They want to keep, people employed.
Yeah.
They want to keep the workforce growing, but they still tend to, not agree on how this is going to get done. So what do you make of this spending and how it's actually going to impact the inability of folks to get jobs here post-pandemic?
Everything in what you said about what Evers wants to do, it's government speak for getting people into a job. All right, so look, we've had a workforce problem in Wisconsin for years. Go back to Governor Walker. Remember he promised to create 250,000 jobs in his first term in 2010? Then realized, well, we have all these open jobs and can't fill them, or had a trouble filling them, and changed his tone about how many jobs he's going to create, right? All right, so fast forward now, we are getting close to pre-pandemic we're at pre-pandemic levels for unemployment rate. We're not where we're at our best, which was like 2.8 or 9 under Walker, so we're still a ways away. But my point is, we've had a problem in Wisconsin getting people into open jobs. Whether it's skill set, whether it's desire, whatever it is, we have more jobs than people looking for work or want the jobs. The question is how to fill it. And the Republican point in Wisconsin Manufactured Commerce keeps going back to the unemployment benefits because remember, in Wisconsin, your maximum benefit per week is $370 a week, right?
Yep.
The enhanced federal benefit is $300 more on top of that. You do some math and multiply it out, that's about $16 an hour. Republicans keep saying there's a reason why people aren't going back to work, and that's it, because it's more lucrative to stay at home than take that job. Now, the counter is there are pandemic reasons, there are child care reasons, there are other reasons for not getting back into the workforce with some people. So I guess we'll find out for sure September, Labor Day weekend, I think those benefits expire.
Okay.
We'll see if they move, if that moves after that. That said, this is the Evers response, trying to find a way to use the federal money, and he has got a lot of federal money to spend, thanks to ARPA, to do stuff.
Okay. Well, let's actually throw it there to a clip of Governor Evers and kind of how he launched this and announced these funds up at the press conference in Green Bay earlier this week.
The past year and a half obviously has challenged our communities and our state and frankly our country in more ways than we could have ever imagined. But the Wisconsin we know and love is coming back. We are continuing to be the national leader, getting shots in arms. Our unemployment levels are some of the lowest in the nation, and our economy and communities continue to bounce back. That said, I've heard from many Wisconsin business owners, employers, out-of-work job seekers that while employment in Wisconsin continues to grow, our economy is facing, obviously, a workforce shortage. A shortage that existed well before I became governor, but has been made worse, obviously, by this pandemic. That's why I've committed to directing our state's American Rescue Plan Act funds for programs that offer economic relief to our small businesses, our families, workers, and also community organizations. Folks, Wisconsin is bouncing back, but we can't take our foot off the gas now, and these investments will help get folks back to work to help our families and our communities and our state recover together.
Our next topic is another effort by state Democrats to bring jobs to the state and keep two paper plants up and running. So earlier this week, Senator Janet Bewley and Representatives Beth Myers, Rick Milroy, and Katrina Shanklin introduced legislation to funnel $65 million towards the efforts to reopen the paper mill plants in Wisconsin Rapids and Park Falls. The bill is similar to an amendment voted down recently by Republicans, but it differs from that amendment in that it includes funding for education needed to ensure the state meets maintenance of effort requirements. While Republicans voted down that amendment, they did pass the entire bill, but Evers vetoed it. I wanted to point out that this news comes as the Neenah paper plant announced on Wednesday that it plans to close its Appleton facility, which will impact 100 jobs, saying that plant is no longer competitive and it could potentially close by September. So we definitely have an issue here in Wisconsin with paper mills closing down, struggling to maintain competitiveness, but this has been such a huge industry in the state for so long that when they do close, it impacts so many people. Yeah. And I think it's natural for lawmakers to want to, step in and try to keep these places up and running. And you and I had a conversation earlier this week where you mentioned how the funding was different for this bill. And I thought that was quite interesting and was hoping you could kind of touch on how the funding for this specific bill is different and how it kind of feeds into bringing more education dollars into the state.
Sure. So remember, Republicans, in their version of the bill, they wanted to use the American Rescue Plan Act money to basically go through the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and put $65 million into loans to buy the mills and reopen them. Evers vetoed the bill, saying he didn't think that was a stable funding source, didn't think he could use that funding source for something like this. Republicans questioned that, yada, 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 go back and forth. Yeah. He vetoes the bill. All right, so this bill is very similar to the other one, but uses general purpose revenue. That's your main checking account for the state, your income, sales, corporate taxes, those kinds of things. The question is, one, will Republicans get behind this version of the bill? There's also this new thing where a company offered to buy one of the companies that owns one of the closed mills, the bigger of the two. So that may negate the need for state assistance to reopen that mill. We will see. That said, what's really interesting about this bill is what it states, what kind of the message it sends for future efforts to spend general purpose revenue between now and the end of the session. Because along with the $65 million in general purpose revenue for the loans, there's $53 million education spending. Why is that important? Well, with the federal government and the last two COVID-19 packages, you had to maintain your state spending on K-12 and higher education to qualify for the federal funds. It's about $2.3 billion or so dollars for schools. Now, that money is very important because Republicans passed a budget saying we're not going to put a lot of state money into schools for new spending because there's so many federal dollars coming in. We're going to count that as the increase for schools. They're going to be swimming in money next few years.
Okay.
All right. Here's the rub. You have to maintain that spending commitment to schools throughout the period. So if you increase spending on, for example, these loans, you have to add education spending to maintain the share. It's not the dollars you spend on education, it's their share of general purpose revenue, state spending overall. You have to maintain that percentage. So everything you increase for one thing, you got to increase education or you can't do it.
And what is that level? Did you say like almost 60 cents for a dollar? Or
Well, I think it's $65 million for loans and $53 million for the education piece of this.
Okay.
And our state share is like 35% of GPR was being spent on K-12 and higher education, which includes UW, tech colleges, and the Higher Educational Aids Board. I think those are the ones you got to watch.
Okay.
So there's an example of there's $1.7 billion projected to be in the general fund through the end of this budget. So that money is basically, Evers had vetoed a transfer to the Budget Stabilization Fund for $550 million and vetoed $700 million roughly that would have been used to update with holding tables. So when you get your paycheck each week, there's taxes withheld. If you update those tables to lower how much is taken out for the tax cuts, you take a hit up front. But then the state recoups that money because they pay lower refunds come tax day.
Yeah.
He vetoed that change, so you're going to get your money, just you're going to get it on April 15th, not each week in your paycheck, right? So there's money now freed up by those vetoes in the general fund of $1.7 billion. There may be priorities to spend that money. You may hear Republicans talk about tax cuts, which wouldn't be a part of the education funding formula, but if they want to spend money on Prep Project X, you have to consider now the education component. It almost doubles the price tag in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I find that pretty interesting. The attachment there, because we all know Evers campaigned and is a huge proponent of making sure that the public education system in the state is, highly funded. So I think that connection that you just discussed is pretty interesting, especially as we continue to spend that money, throughout the year. I wanted to switch topics real quick and talk about the ongoing fallout from the 2020 election. We're 8 months past the November election, but still some lingering ramifications from that. Earlier this week, Speaker Voss once again reiterated that the private investigation into those numbers aims to give citizen confidence in the 2022 election. Also this week, a story that the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel broke talked about a group of half a dozen volunteers, including a convicted felon, have collected images of 2 million ballots using the state's open records law. They will be looking at those records to see if there's any fraud occurring. I believe they said that Brown County is the next area that they're going to be going to, and the group also expressed interest in looking at ballots in Door County, Milwaukee County, Sauk, and Sawyer counties. In other lingering actions, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee is seeking to intervene in Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty's lawsuit to bar the use of absentee ballot drop boxes prior to the 2022 election. The Democratic Campaign Committee is seeking to intervene for two different reasons. First, it's claiming it would have to divert resources to re-educate voters because thousands of people used them in the 2020 election. For comparison's sake, nearly 41% of ballots cast were absentee ballots in this most recent election compared to 4.8% in 2016. So that is a significant shift in voter behavior. The Dems are also arguing that there is no evidence to support Will's assertion that the use of the drop boxes facilitated voter fraud. And just as a reminder, Will's lawsuit aims to have absentee ballots only returnable by mail or in person to the clerk's office. And then the final point I wanted to make and have you comment on a bit, JR, was the Trump campaign arguing that Evers and other local officials waited too long to submit a request to be reimbursed for the recount. And I know that when we spoke earlier this week, you had mentioned something about this case possibly being a precedent and the likeness of it to something that was happening in Michigan. And I thought that was pretty interesting and was hoping you could kind of expand on that again.
So remember, there were multiple lawsuits filed trying to overturn Wisconsin's election results, just like there were other states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, so on and so forth. In Wisconsin, you had the Trump campaign's lawsuits, and you had some supporters led by Sidney Powell and others who filed their own lawsuits. The governor's office, governor's attorneys, and the attorneys for local officials who were kind of brought into these lawsuits have asked two federal courts, judges I should say, to basically order Trump and his attorneys to reimburse them for their costs. Yeah. Now, interesting is one, the Sidney Powell lawsuit was, let's say, flawed from the start. So, for example, that lawsuit listed Derek VanEgeren as a plaintiff originally. He ran for the 3rd Congressional District last year as a Republican. He did not give permission to list him as a plaintiff in the lawsuit.
I remember that now, yeah.
Also, that lawsuit originally asked for video footage from a arena in Detroit used to count absentee ballots for a Wisconsin law. So there are all kinds of slipshod errors in that lawsuit. A judge threw it out. That's been fully briefed. And we've been waiting for a decision in that case about whether the judge is going to say, yes, you need to pay these guys attorney's fees. This Michigan case, a judge up there pulled those lawyers in for a hearing and was basically grilling about some things. People I've talked to wondered if they're waiting to see signals from that court about whether to punish those lawyers, because that could set a precedent of these lawsuits of whether they have to reimburse. Now, the fine from the Trump people, they're saying, look, the Trump campaign made a good faith effort to challenge these things. We should not be penalized for it. And oh, by the way, they laid out the timeline of how this thing played out and argued that Evers and his attorneys waited too long to file the request. So now, I'm not a lawyer, don't play one on TV. I don't know what a court's going to do with that. But they are trying to get reimbursed because it's expensive to defend lawsuits like this.
Yeah, it is. And I did want to give just a moment for you to kind of talk about what happened yesterday. There was late breaking news with another court case, or a wash in court cases in Wisconsin, having to do with redistricting. So we have about 5 minutes left on the show, but I was hoping that you could kind of go into that just a little bit, because it is important, but a late breaking thing that I think we need to touch on here. Real quick,
Republican legislative leaders signed contracts with legal law firms in anticipation of a redistricting lawsuit. So typically redistricting, you try and pass a bill, try and get it signed and put new maps in place. That's only happened like once in the last several decades in Wisconsin. Typically courts draw the lines, especially for the legislature. What's happening here is Republicans said, okay, we're figuring a lawsuit's going to come. We're going to sign these contracts, get our lawyers lined up so that when we get this lawsuit, we're ready to go. A Dane County judge said you can't do it. You don't have the authority to hire lawyers for a lawsuit that doesn't exist yet. An appeals court said, yeah, the court exercised discretion properly in saying you don't have that authority. But the legislature attorneys went to the Supreme Court and said, hey, we think this is done incorrectly. We want you to take over the case and issue a stay of that lower court ruling while we appeal the merits. The Supreme Court yesterday, split decision 4-3, said we're going to put that ruling on hold. They concluded that the lawmakers face a greater harm, they don't have legal representation for a complex process, than taxpayers do if they improperly pay for contracts. Now, we've already dished out some money for these things. I've been tracking legal bills that the Republicans have racked up. About $250,000 so far between the legal fees for the lawsuit and legal fees paid to the firm. And more is coming. That was only through the contracts were cut off in late April, so they'll restart now. The legal bills for the lawsuit were through the end of April as well, or early May. We've had appeals filed since then. So that legal bill will go up. But yeah, so I mean, what's going to happen is we knew they were going to get their attorneys eventually. They just get them sooner now because of this court ruling than they would have otherwise.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting late breaking news. We're going to wrap up the show with the stock picks.
Yeah. So Rising.
Yeah.
So Tony Evers. So look, the $5 million you raised was, on the surface, an impressive number. He announced it on Monday, but people thought, okay, the Democratic Party gave him, I think it was $2.7 million or something, or 2.9 last year. So they assumed that there'd be a lot of it would be Democratic Party money, which would make sense because Republicans' real finance laws to say state party can take unlimited contributions and make unlimited transfers to candidates. It's a new playbook, and Tony Evers and State Party Chair Ben Wickler have perfected it, to be quite frank.
Okay.
But of that $5 million that Evers raised, $3.1 million came from donors, individual donors. Why is that significant? Scott Walker again had a national fundraising network because Democrats tried to recall him in 2012. He built that list we talked about. Yeah. He built a really good list. Well, he raised $3.5 million from individual donors in the July 13 report and $3.2 million in July of 17. It shows you that Evers not only has this big money operation with the state party, he's also creating a very credible small dollar and individual donor operation that rivals what Scott Walker did. And Republicans dismissed Tony Evers as an unaspiring candidate, whatnot. You can't question the fundraising operations he's got going on. It's a good number he put up this period.
Okay, very good. What about mixed? Ryan Owens.
Ryan Owens. All right. So, look, Ryan raised good money. I mean, pretty good money for a candidate, for AG, especially a first-time candidate, but he has an experience that Josh Kaul has. And what I'm wondering is, or Eric Toney. Now, Eric Toney, really get into his numbers, he raised $41,000 during the reporting period. Of that $41,000, $7,000 is an in-kind donation for website development and kind from himself. In-kind means you perform a service for the campaign and don't charge him for it, essentially, or you pick up the cost. Or his Eric Toney is a final-like DA. He's got that experience, but he doesn't have the money to like contrast experience with Ryan Owens. Oh, by the way, Eric Toney charged, but then dropped charges against 10 people for violating Evers' stay-at-home order last spring. That is not good in a Republican primary. So Eric needs money to go out there and promote like his background, and the fact that he's got his law enforcement support, et cetera. Ryan, though, again, has these endorsements from or the support of like some GOP heavyweights. What I'm wondering is if Ryan Owens runs against Josh Kaul in a general election, can he make the case against Josh Kaul because Josh Kaul has prosecutorial experience and Ryan doesn't? Now, look, we both know that DOJ is basically one of the state's largest law firms. Being attorney general is about managing that law firm and setting a tone. But for voters, it's just like voters like judges for state Supreme Court. They like prosecutors for attorney general. Go back to 2006. We had a wave election for Democrats, but J.B. Van Hollen, Republican, won.
That's right.
Because he did 86,000 votes better than Mark Green.
That's right.
That campaign, J.B. Van Hollen supporters pointed out that Kathleen Falk was not a prosecutor, had no prosecutorial experience. Now, it's 15 years later. Who knows where voters are going to be at next fall? Kaul has his vulnerabilities. I mean, Republicans will point out that he wasn't very vocal during the violent riots and violent protests in Kenosha or Madison. If you're the top law enforcement officer, where are you at when there's unrest? Things like that they can beat him up on. But if I'm Josh Kaul, my ad campaign against Ryan Owens would be Ryan Owens has never prosecuted a rapist, a murderer, or even a jaywalking ticket, and pound that issue home. The question is, what's the environment be like next fall out of Washington? Because the party part of the White House often struggles, right? Because it's just the way midterms work. Democrat in the White House. Josh Kaul is not well known. Most AGs aren't, by the way. There are very few attorneys general who are well-known people in politics. So he's very vulnerable to that national environment we might see. But again, that having that prosecutor experience versus Ryan, that could be maybe a trump card. We'll see. We'll see.
No, it's definitely an interesting race and lots of things factoring into that. So whose stock is falling this week?
So Scott Wolt, he's a judge up in the Fox Valley, suspended because he made inappropriate comments in court and also brandished a gun twice. Now look, this is very rare. I went back and looked at his commission records. Going back to 1976, I think it was, there have been like 15 judges suspended at period. So this is unique. What's interesting about this case, however, is that it was a 3-2 ruling, and the two conservatives said, yeah, we think he should be suspended for 7 days, which starts August 2nd.
Okay.
But we don't agree with punishing him for brandishing a gun in court, because what happened was he was sentencing somebody and bemoaned the lack of security in the courthouse and showed people a gun that I carry this with me. Also, the government day, with students came in the courtroom, and he showed it to them then. The two conservatives said, look, what he said was inappropriate, but we think the three liberals are basically being politically correct, unhappy about him showing a gun in court when he has a concealed carry permit. So, a little twist to that case.
Little twist, but it is interesting that you went back and found that this has only happened 15 times. So this is not a common occurrence here. So on that, on that point, it's a very interesting little story. So we are, getting ready to wrap up today's show. Again, I'm Jessica VanEgeren.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
And that is Rewind for the week of July 12th. Have a great weekend.
Rewind, your week in review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.